It's finally here. Welcome to the Belmont Stakes version of Talking Horses, sponsored by our good friends at Saratoga Springwater. She is Sarah the Mig El-Badwi.
I really like my new nickname.
Yeah, I like that too.
I'm
Yeah, I think that might be a nickname that sticks.
It's really hard to find a nickname for Sarah, and I think that
The Mig
is going to be the
just
one.
Flows through.
We obviously look exactly the same.
Is it? We're just making fun. Anyway, she's Sarah, I'm Andy, and it's been a long time coming and a lot of anticipation, and it's finally here. And I don't know about you, Sarah, I just think it's just incredibly great to be here.
And we've lucked out so much with the weather. It was looking like the forecast was maybe a little bit dicey, but we have had such good luck going forwards. And today looks like it's going to be a nice day as well. Seems like we're dodging some of those raindrops too. So
yeah, today's no rain predicted today in
nice.
Saratoga, so you never know. But everything's good, and it's just great to be here. And we really appreciate all the support from our fans. The first 2 days have gone extremely well so far. And obviously the big one is upon us, 14 races, so an enormous amount for us to talk about. We'll get to work on the card in just a moment. But you guys know the drill. If you're not a member of Naira Bets, get on over there. Go to NairaBets.com. Use the promo code Belmont25. It's the last day you can get that free $25 bet for the Belmont Stakes, as well as the $200 sign-up bonus. Play through Naira Bets. Bet any track, anywhere, anytime through Naira Bets. We have a couple of special wagers today, as well as a conversation taking place on the Talking Horses set for some reason. Don't let us get in the way of your conversation, guys. The Met Mile Belmont Stakes Double and All Turf Triple Play. Obviously, go to belmontstakes.com/special for more on these special wagers. We have a 50% boost on your win bet in the Belmont Stakes. More information on betting that, go to NairaBets.com. You got to opt in, get more information on that as well. Belmont Stakes race number 12 of our 14-race card. Believe we have a cross-country pick 5. There it is. A couple races at Monmouth. Guys, that's for tomorrow, but I can't wait for it. But you know what? And I'm excited about tomorrow.
Wager?
And Eddie, I know you are too. You love New York Bred Showcase Day, but it'll be tomorrow. So keep in mind, Cross Country Big 5 does return tomorrow. We just want to make sure you knew. We also have the show. We got lots of shows going on today.
Many
10:30 until 4 on FS1. These have different names.
They sure do.
Now, that's actually not really true. Then it's 4 to 6. We are on FS1 from 10:30 until 7:27. These shows have slightly different names. FS2 from 7 to 8:10 as well. And of course, I think the next slate's going to show you that on Big Fox from 4 to 6, Belmont Day and Fox, and the Belmont Stakes on Fox from 6 to 7. There will be a simulcast on FS1 during that period as well. But the big show on Fox will be taking place from 4 to 7 on Big Fox. All right, Sarah, let's get to work. Race number 1 features the return of General Partner, the number 3, and we'll go back to him breaking his maiden here at Saratoga on Labor Day weekend. And, I almost felt like when I first saw him the entries when he was entered Churchill.
Yesterday.
Well, no, he's actually entered Churchill, and he was scratched out of their race. He would not have beaten that Doug O'Neill horse, I think. Just how good he really was. And he was an exceptionally fast horse. He is coming back at a mile. He is going to be a hard horse to be in front of in this race, assuming he breaks cleanly. I've got him on top. You've picked him second.
Yeah, he's the horse to beat. He's the obvious one to default to in this race, and probably the best horse in this race.
To default to him?
Just said the best horse in this race, going on what he did as a 2-year-old, because
I don't think it's defaulting.
whatever you want to call it. Call it what you want.
Selecting.
Sure, picking. That's all we do here. Look, any progressive improvement for him from 2 to 3, he's going to be extremely tough to handle in this race. And you know that he has that early speed that he brings to the table as well. He's capable of running those mid-80s, high 80s, low 90s buyers. If he takes any sort of step forward, and even if he doesn't, he's going to be a major player.
Even if he doesn't, he's a major player, and the presumption is he would. I agree. And he also has the advantage of likely being the speed. I pick Suerte second. You have him on top.
I like that he's had a little bit of time off, finally, a horse that had a pretty full campaign. And in terms of who he was facing overall, he wasn't getting the win that often, but he was an ultra game type of horse that really would show up against some of the better older allowance horses. While he's been at this level for a little while, I think that he's just one of the ones that has some of those numbers to go back to, that if he were to run them again, I wanted him as possibly the only alternative if General Partner perhaps needed one off the layoff.
Yeah, general partner's not going to need one off the layoff. Doesn't mean he's going to win, but I don't think he's going to need one off the layoff. You know, you can go both ways with Suerte, and it's that sort of eternal argument of, are you a winter horse? Look at a horse like Leading Contender yesterday, who had form to be competitive and just didn't run anymore. I don't disagree. Obviously, I think Suerte's in danger in here. I picked him second. But you've got horses not just like General Partner, but you have Black Ray in the Rail, who won a pretty key race, actually, and broke his maiden. We don't know what we'll get from him. He clearly has to improve a little bit. But even Classic Legacy will go back to his nose defeat at Churchill Downs. I mean, this is a horse that has already run recently some pretty big figures, and he's a new face to this crew. Will be a better price. I don't like that the winner of the race, a Brad Cox horse, had run figures in the high 70s, low 80s, and then suddenly ran the 93. But it did come up a fast race, and it was second fast race in a row.
And his last two races are just so much better than what we had really seen from him in the past. And I like that they've done that gradual stretch out in distance, stretch back out in distance for him. And this is the half to Art Collector, so you would think that he'd be able to go a little bit further if need be going forwards. But I just kind of wonder what he ultimately ends up wanting to do. But if he runs either of his last two races here, he's obviously a player towards the outside.
I completely agree. Race number 2, 1 mile on the inner turf course. The rails are down to 0 today. Presumably we'll leave them down again tomorrow. We were going to move them out. I'm guessing we're hoping we can leave them down tomorrow. Lady to Berry, who both of us have second. I thought she ran well to break her maiden, and she's running figures that are fast enough to be competitive once again as a 2-year-old in route races, and I don't think you see any kind of horses that have bigger improvements from 2 to 3 than turf routers from a speed figure standpoint. And she was wired in this race by a horse who was able to control up front. I don't know how good she really is, but if she improves the prerequisite 10 points kind of, at least that we see these horses improve, she might just be too good for these horses, Sarah, even though both of us have taken a little shot against her.
And I think that's completely possible. And while it might, on the surface, look like she's getting some class relief as she drops out of a graded stakes race, this is a solid field that she's going to be facing for the level. And not everybody has those same credentials of who they've faced in the past or what they've done in terms of their prior races. But she'd have to take a little bit of a step forward. She's likely to do so.
I don't think I think it's a very competitive field. I mean, there's no horses in here that are running in the buyers in the 80s at all. So you're really with a field where if she improves just a little bit, now that doesn't mean others can't improve in here, and it's very possible, and likely some will. I've tried to beat her, as have you. We'll take a look at your pick, the 7 Buttercream Babe.
She's one that she's had this steady diet of stakes races since breaking her maiden on debut at Kentucky Downs. And while she's one of those horses that has that forward position, has been a little bit keen in some of her races, hasn't totally switched leads, I thought that Surfer Girl was kind of a questionable non-disqualification of Dreamfire when she was stalking to the outside. There was some contact in the stretch. Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, I don't want to hold it against her too much. She broke from the rail. She was extremely slow to get going that day. And then in both starts at Gulfstream, she was caught very wide while being forwardly placed. I like that Luis Saez gets back aboard. She's not a dirt horse, clearly, as we saw in that last start when she came back off the layoff. And I think that she's one that can be forward and is getting a little bit of class relief.
Okay. I think horses like Money Grab, I thought Money Grab actually ran extremely well in her turf debut. And she broke a length slow in there. She was 3 to 4 wide around the turns and was even running at the end. Now, we're still wondering how good the Memories of Silver was. Obviously, Sweet Rebecca, things didn't work out in her second start. I like the horse who finished second there, and she kind of threw in a clunker as well. So I'm wondering about that race, but I thought she improved a lot on the turf. So she's in my play with Lady to Berry, but I like Storm Miami. Storm Miami came over here from Europe for Brendan Walsh, a trainer that I have a world of respect for, and just got a ridiculous trip. Was 3 to 4 wide around the racetrack and was still sort of finishing in that race. How good was that race? I don't know, but her figures are good enough to be competitive with a lousy trip. She gets an inside post in this race, and I got to think she's a horse that's a lot better than that race looks, and she's my alternative, the 5 Lady to Berry. I'm using the 4 with a 5 and 8.
Fair enough.
All right. Race number Trey. I think Sarah and I are on the similar page in race number 3, and we just flip-flopped our picks here. And we'll start with the one you have on top, Awesome Native. I guess the question with her is how you feel about the switch to Dana Saul, as this owner has taken the horses, obviously, from TT and moved them to Dana Saul. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? I don't know. You got the layoff to contend with. Also, you have to ask yourself, is there going to be enough pace in here? Because this horse has no speed.
No, he doesn't. And I think that with that trainer change, when you're asking yourself those questions, it's a wait and see approach for me. I like to find out for myself instead of viewing it as some sort of negative or positive right away. It's not something that I'm going to factor in too much
That's a good
immediately until we see one way or the other how is it working out. But I know that Time Form Yes doesn't have this pace particularly fast, but don't horses like Cup and Full Screen and even Mandatory need to be a little bit forwardly placed in here?
No.
No, they
well,
don't?
let's see. I think that, I mean, I don't think Cup is really that fast. What paces he's been involved in that fast? Looms boldly, is the speed. He's
yes.
going. He's quick, but I don't think necessarily ensures a fast pace. And I'm not saying you're wrong. We did see a track, and we had a little bit of rain, but we did see a track that seemed to be favorable to front-end speed, at least yesterday, and the inside was good. So I don't know. Listen, I'm not against Awesome Native. I mean, you and I saw this race almost exactly the same, so it's not like we have some argument here. I like Subrogate. Now, Subrogate is a horse that I bet last time, and I am against often betting horses I bet last time that won, but I thought his effort was a lot better than that 84 buyer suggests, because he attacked a pace that just completely fell apart, and I know Ennis Timing finished third, but Radio Red came from the clouds. He was coming off a layup. He was forcing a horse who was very quick the whole way around the track, and he still was able to finish in there. I like that race, and I feel like this horse could have another move forward in him. And, unlike Awesome Native, depending on the pace, he's not going to be compromised if it comes up as a relatively fair pace as opposed to a quick pace. So I prefer the horse that's a little more forwardly placed, but honestly, I saw it as a bit of a coin flip. What about a horse like Bilal on the rail, who did no running in the Gold Fever, but he did run that big buyer 2 back, but it's the only good figure he has. He's one of those one-number horses.
It's his only start on Lasix, so I kind of wonder if that was a little bit of a factor for him, and if it was, and he's getting that today, I did want to consider that because
Great point.
His numbers without it are significantly worse.
No,
if
that's a
that's
great
not
point.
the reason, if that's not the variable, then you're looking at a one-number horse that might not be able to get back to that race. But if it is, I think he's worth possibly throwing in the mix as a horse that's going to be a fair enough price.
No, that's a great point. The speed had to hold together in the race. He got the big fig, and he is a horse that potentially could be a factor. I mean, I don't want to suggest that Mandatory is just done, but it is a little disconcerting how well he got. How good he got, how well he was running. And then last time, he just completely stunk. But if he bounces back to some of those efforts, he can be very tough in this race.
It's tough for me to trust him because he's a horse that really jumped up significantly and then tailed off kind of back to where he had been before.
Are we supposed to be using Full Screen more than either of us have him? I don't have him anywhere, and you have him fourth.
Is this an iRider Tees Jr. situation?
Well, it's also, no, he ran a good race behind Blazing 7, who, I don't know if you and I particularly like him in the Met Mile, but he is
the Met Mile is a better race than
right,
this.
and at the very least, I think you want to use him as a gauge. And if you're somebody who likes Blazing Sevens, then I don't think you're supposed to dismiss this horse. I'm just wondering, and one of the reasons I'm wondering how good that race was is because of this horse running as well as he did.
Right, and overall, he has some of those faster numbers going back on the page when he has run on dirt. It's not like that was a figure that was anomalous to his previous ones overall. I just kind of wonder how talented he really is. I know he beat Arturius. Arturius came back to win, but...
He came back and won and ran 4 or 5 buyer points slower.
Yeah,
So
I've never really thought that he's that good.
Well, he's a horse that could have been good that never really lived up to the how good we thought he might have been. I mean, this horse was under 10 to 1 in the Travers. So it's a tough game for everybody. Race number 4 is the True North, presented by F.W. Webb. It's a name you see a lot, right?
F.W. Webb?
The paper.
W.E. Mason. That's who you're thinking of.
Oh, I am. Okay.
Yeah.
I've already blown it with the sponsors. I apologize. Just keep my big fat mouth shut.
We do use their paper, though.
Okay. Gun Pilot. I think
Yes.
there's 2 schools of thought. You've got him a little lower than I do. I've got him second. And I do think he's the horse to beat. I wonder about the race he comes out of at Churchill, and he is the horse to beat. But showing a win in a Grade 1 at Churchill coming in this race is going to make him a short price. And no knock on Christian Torres, who rode very well at Oaklawn, but This is Belmont Stakes Day with a lot of riders in the room, but he did it on track. He did it on Kentucky Derby Day too. So there's no reason to be scared of him. And he may be just one of these Asmussen horses that's getting good, and he'll continue to get better, like we see from Steve so often. I don't trust that field, though. Here, my Song came back and ran 5 buyer points worse. The 4th horse was 3rd in allowance race, 3 buyer points worse, and still makes him in the mid-90s, maybe the horse to beat. But I'm just thinking he's going to be even money morning line, a horse that at a short price might be worth taking at least a little shot against.
I agree. And I think that you're looking at a horse that has shown that progressive improvement over his last couple of starts, but 2 of them have been at Oaklawn, which is more of a fair surface where some of the paces can start to back up. Horses are able to make fair runs.
That was a big closers track.
Yeah, I
there,
wasn't
though.
going to say that, but I would say fair.
Lean on that closers track
Yeah, we don't
angle.
believe in that closers bias,
Raj.
but a fair surface for horses to be able to make their runs if they are so capable.
It was shocking how, it actually was shocking how fair the track, not shocking, but I mean, one thing about Oaklawn, it was fair. I mean, and they had a lot of
much
weather.
weather.
but
They've been
it's-
able to maintain
but
that so
yeah,
well.
no, it was really, it's an interesting point.
And I think that we get so used to some of those speed favoring tracks that Oaklawn will look like it has a closer's bias
Wasn't.
in comparison, but we know that's not the case. When you look at the Churchill Downs and that 101 buyer, that was a very fast pace for 7 furlongs. And I wonder if that helped him along a little bit and if he's not going to get quite the same pace and quite the same racetrack here going the 6.5 furlongs in this race.
He just feels like an even money shot that may well win, but I don't think he's 50% to win. I don't think he's 40% to win, you
No, I
know,
don't
which
trust
is
him.
sort of what it's suggesting with takeout. Rotney, there is an argument for Rotney. You have him 4th, I have him 3rd, because we'll take a look at his last. He is the controlling speed in this race. And I'll tell you
Absolutely.
something, watch these races, and if you think forward speed is carrying, he has at times run figures good enough to win. But the majority of the time, he is a little bit slower than these horses. But I'm not going to be shocked when he wires the field, Sarah.
He could, and I mean, he has those numbers that suggest that he fits right in with the rest of this field, or possibly even a step above. But then he also has those numbers sometimes in graded stakes races against Open Company, where you're wondering, is he really going to step up with one of his better races? And he ran well last time, beating Sheriff Bianco, but that field versus this field, you got to look at the differences in terms of who he was facing.
And I also think as we look at a replay that involves the horses that you and I have on top, 2 different horses, Baby Yoda and Accretive, Baby Yoda sort of getting reborn last time and running a good race, his first good race in quite a while, and a horse that's run well in Saratoga in the past, even beating Olympiad. They're going to be more aggressive with him, right? Eric was aggressive last time, it worked out. I can't imagine, I know he had the rail last time, but if he runs his best race being aggressive in a while, how are you not aggressive? Is he as fast as Rodney? No, but he can be competitive.
And he doesn't need the lead to be successful, as we've seen in the past. And I know it's not one of your favorite angles, but if you look at his races here at Saratoga versus his races elsewhere, he has had quite a bit of success as being one of those horses for courses.
No, I don't. I'm not going to argue that. He's run his best races up here. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
Saratoga can be a bit of a horse for course. I think one of the reasons that it mitigated, because when I was a kid, and you were a long way from being born, there
Those
were
were
these
nice
horses that for
me.
you,
Yeah,
or me.
For me.
Right, I wasn't bothering Sarah back then. Just
yeah.
other people, many of them.
Many other people.
I think, and I could be wrong about this, but back then we didn't stable at Saratoga, so the horses shipped up right before the meet. And I wondered if somehow maybe that sort of energized some horses, whereas a lot of these horses train here all the time. Baby Yoda's been training up here for a while, you know, different times. I don't know if he's always been at Belmont. He's been there recently. Regardless, I don't love him in here, but I can't argue that he's impossible in here. And listen, I'm picking horse Accretive that finished second to him last time, but I think it's going to be a little more contentious up front. And Accretive's a horse that at times has run some bigger figures. Now, is there an argument that he's tailing off a little bit? Yes, there is. But at least he showed that life again. If he can get back to his better figs, he is the best horse facing Gun Pilot if he can find those better figs. And I don't think he ran that badly last time in a race that was dominated up front, making that late run. And I kind of pressed for him to run in this race, and I'm going to take him and stick with him as my alternative, the favorite.
Which is completely fair. I mean, there's obviously some ability when you look at his first couple of races. And when I sort of question, does he really want to go this distance? Does he really want to cut back?
I think he
Well,
does.
his best races have been
The
going
Amsterdam
to
here.
6.5, his first 2 starts when he finished second to Gunite. I mean, thinking about what he's done lately versus this cutback, it might actually end up suiting him. I just didn't love that he was a little bit further back going the 7 furlongs last time. If we do see a scenario where Rodney is freewheeling on the front end, Baby Yoda's sitting just off him, I didn't necessarily see those horses coming from the back. But if you think it's going to be a slightly more contentious pace, he could be the one right there.
See what happens in the True North. Eddie, we'll take a break after race 7. We'll split the card if that works for you. The Poker is coming up in race number 5, and we'll look at one of many people's favorite horses, the number 2 Casa Creed, winning the 4-star Dave for his 2nd year in a row last year. And of course, he ran terrific in the Breeders' Cup Mile, and he is way the horse to beat in this race. His best races are better than these.
Absolutely.
Having said that, he had a bit of a tour of the Middle East this winter, and it didn't work out as well as it did in prior years. And he is an 8-year-old. And I'm not saying his best years are behind him, and I certainly hope he wins for my good friend Lee Einseidler. I'd like to see him win this race, but having said that, he's not going to get better. And there's that possibility he takes a step back, whereas a horse like Carl Spackler, and also Talk of the Nation, as newly turned 4-year-olds, and even Kubrick, who we'll talk about, these are horses that can improve. And he's got to run back to it. Eddie's in a big hurry with his replays. He just heard the names. That's cool. We'll look at Carl Spackler in that ding-dod race. He never listens to me.
Always listens
and the opening verse. We'll finish the conversation. I just prefer Carl Spackler. I know it was a narrow victory. It was off a layoff because I really do think he's a very good horse in here. Not knocking Talk of the Nation. Not going to be surprised when he runs well in here. Also, I prefer Carl Spackler, and I'm just thinking he's more upside than Casa Creed, and the gap isn't that severe.
Right, and we know who Casa Creed is. We're all big fans of him here, and we know what his game is. And if he can replicate that, what we've seen here, especially at Saratoga, he's obviously going to be very tough in this spot. But when you look at how he was coming into some of those summer races or spring races in the past, you mentioned that he went over to the Middle East, and he's performed very well there in the past, really running against better company. The last race, I don't want to hold it against him too much, but it's not like some of his races there in the past.
He had issues over there. So I don't think it's surprising, considering going into the race, what his issues were. So I'm going to not, I agree with what you're saying, but I think it's a little circumstantial. I don't think, I think it was unrealistic to expect last time he was going to run his best race. So the fact that he ran a little worse, not as surprising. Still a fair point, and, you know, but I'm not holding against as much. What am I missing with Mysterious Knight?
He may not be good enough whatsoever, but when you look at his 2 races here in North America, he was able to win the summer pretty convincingly, and then when he did come back for the Hall of Fame, he was completely eliminated at the start of that race. He broke slowly, he was taken up. This is a horse that likes to be forwardly placed and has some of those sprint races overseas as well, where he's been a little bit more forward and competitive, and I thought that he hasn't been incapable of handling the mile in the past, and I like that he has that rail draw, so it kind of forces his hand to be forwardly placed. Obviously, it's always a question, a horse with those gait issues coming over here that we've seen a couple of times, if he's going to break well or set himself up for a similar trip that he had in the Hall of Fame. But I wanted to give him another shot as a horse that has some ability and has some forward position.
Yeah, it's fine. It's going to be a big price, and at least you're going to go down with a Godolphin, or win or lose with a Godolphin horse. It's a big price. And their horses have been massively overbet, and not just this weekend. Siskin should never have been odds on in that race. Never. Good horse, not odds on. How somebody thought 7-5 was a good price on that horse in yesterday's New York in that competitive field is way beyond me. I mean, she's not that good. And Charlie Appleby brought the right horses over at one time, but I don't think I didn't look up the ROI, but I'm thinking the ROI in the last couple of years in New York is not good with his horses. Now, this one's a big price, so I'm not knocking a big price. I don't see him. I think when he wanted Woodbine has been a playground for Charlie Appleby. His horses have run a lot better there than they ran in future races consistently. So I don't trust their form there. Very fair point about him at the break in the race. He didn't get a chance to run his best race in the Hall of Fame. That's fine. I don't know,
he's
man.
He's not that good. I just thought that he's really didn't have an opportunity to show us what he could do.
Could be the speed in here, so I'm not going to argue against that. As far as Kubrick, The one thing I'll say about Kubrick, and we don't know how good he is because he beat obviously a much weaker field when he won down at Tampa. But he has some ability. He was running in some strong races over in Europe. And that bog in the Maker's Mark, I don't want to hold that race against too many people because they can list it yielding. It was yielding to soft.
And that was a good field.
Yeah, and maybe he just didn't really handle the going there. So that they're being ambitious with him, I'll give him a little bit of a shot to run better, but obviously he's got to run a lot better, but at least, like your horse, this one's a Chad Brown that's a bit of a price.
Right. When you have these connections that we see take money so frequently, if you can get the other one or the less favored one, it sometimes works out.
Race number 6 is the Suburban, which we've moved to Saratoga. It's now, I believe, been run at all of our New York Racing Association tracks. There's a great picture of, in my opinion, one of the most historic Suburbans in 1976 when Foolish Pleasure held off Forgo and Lord Ribot. I have a picture of it at home, and I cut out the New York Times when I was a kid. But if any of you that come to Aqueduct, it's on the wall. There's right by the studio, if people are familiar with the main floor at Aqueduct, there's a picture of Johnny D winning what may have been the first Turf Classic.
Oh, yeah?
He was a tremendous horse. I think he might have won his first 8 or 10 races. And I think Steve Cawthon rode him. And then there's the picture of the Suburban. And it's a pan shot of the whole, you can see the grandstand at Aqueduct.
Oh, awesome.
And then when we ran at Aqueduct
Very cool.
before they put in the winter track, and they ran here before we came up here, and the place is just packed. You know, there's 50,000 there.
Amazing.
It's just a great old photo.
Very cool. Really quick, DRF is showing me that there has been a late scratch to this race.
Who?
Charge It is scratched. Number 4, Charge
That's what
It
you're
is
saying.
scratched.
Do we have the horse scratched?
According to Daily Racing
Going
Form.
forward, we're not going to announce scratches that are in DRF, but thank you, Sarah.
Well, I mean...
No, I hear you. I hear you. We're going to assume that Charge It is in the race until we're told otherwise.
I'm not, but yes, I hear you.
We're going to assume that Charge It is running until we're told otherwise. Ben Duke is the favorite on the outside, and
Clear horse to beat.
yeah, I think this horse has gotten very good. Now, listen, he's getting a class test in here, and that's important. And sometimes these horses, you know, the rail was good last time. He has officially scratched Charge It. Thank you, and thank you, Sarah. Maybe he's a bit of a sucker horse. Would Charge It out, obviously, his price goes down consistently. But both you and I were trying to beat Charge It, and we're sorry he's not going to run in here, but he's not going to play. Ben Duke is going to be forward in here, especially with Charge It out, and I'm not going to bet against him. The question is, can he run as fast as Arthur's Ride did yesterday for Belmont?
I mean, that was sensational. Did we get it?
No,
we're
there's no
waiting
figs
because
on Ways and
distance.
Mean in that one because I think they're waiting to see their times today in those
Comparison.
races, in the mile and a quarter races.
I mean, if you were hoping that he would bounce back, that was quite the bounce back.
That was quite a performance. But I do think the track may have been aiding his performance a little bit. So it could have been a bit of an...
even so.
No.
Blowout.
It was a huge performance, a huge performance, no doubt about it. And if Ben Duke doesn't win, Bill Mott's going to go, well, I ran the wrong horse in the Suburban after that
swapped him
performance.
around.
So please, enlighten me about Time for Trouble.
Oh, there's not much to enlighten about. He's just a horse that's been capable of handling some of these longer distance route races in the past. Maybe he actually wants to go even a little bit further than this. 1.5 miles has been where some of his faster numbers have come from. I know that he's been back and forth on the turf, on the dirt, whatever it may be for him, but he's been very consistent on both surfaces. His last race, the Ben Ali, not that great, but actually improved in the last start before that, where he's finishing third to First Mission, who is a pretty good horse for Brad Cox. And I just like that he's been able to show up in some of these races at these longer distances where I do kind of question, at least for some of this field, do they really want to be going this far?
I don't think he has a race that makes him competitive, but what makes horse racing. Krupe, I think Krupe is dangerous in here. You know, Krupe will show him winning the Queens County and also want to show that he beat Signator, and I want to talk about him as well. Now, Signator may have run the best race here, his own fault. He blew the brake, and it hurt him in blowing the brake. The thing is, I'm not sure that Signator is going to get better with more distance.
Right.
I wonder if the one-turn mile with a faster pace is really the best thing for him. And I got to tell you something. Krupe finished. He didn't. Now, you could say getting left could have cost him the race a little bit, but he was getting outfinished by Krupe, and I feel like Krupe is a horse that's not going to have a problem with 1.25 miles, regardless of what he did in Dubai.
And don't you have to be kind of disappointed by his last couple of races signature in terms of what we've seen from him over his last few starts relative to what we thought he might be able to be.
I give up. He's going to be a big price. If people like him, they should play him. But I think he's been very disappointing. He was a very expensive horse. I wonder if ultimately, if he doesn't run well here, if Sugar look for a race where he can cut him back to a one-turn mile. Get a race with more pace, a race he can close into.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens in the Suburban. And, of course, Charge It is a late scratch. The Ogden Phipps, presented by Ford. Idiomatic and randomized in the Breeders' Cup Distaff. I'm against Idiomatic in here. She may win. I think this is the day to beat her in here.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you my case against her.
Tell me all about it.
Well, she didn't really run any better than randomized here. They both ran about the same race, and if either one has more room to move forward, it's randomized. I know randomized didn't run well in her return. She didn't run that badly, and she has a right to improve second off a layoff, and she's been training well since then. And they were on the fence about running her until she was training as well as she was. But more than that, she's a horse when she ran those big figs and was the deserving champion, except for the Delaware handicap, she pretty much had her own way controlling on the front end. And when she ran the Breeders' Cup Distaff, she won, but she didn't run nearly the fig when she got pressure up front. And then last time, where she was very game, and she ran terrific in there, but once again, she ran a 95 buyer when she got pressure. And she's going to have to deal with randomize, and you know Joel is going to air it out because he knows how fast she is and how she likes to run.
And she drew the rail.
And I wonder if Idiomatic is necessarily as good, A, now, but also as good as she was. And the other thing is, let's be honest about her last race. It looked good going in. Pretty Mischievous didn't show up, and we love the second place finisher, Free Like a Girl.
But
we love her because she's a really cool Louisiana bred that's won over $1 million, but nobody's going to confuse her with the best fillier mares in the country. So I think she's in a tougher spot, going to have to deal with real speed in this race, and I think if she's 3 to 5, she's extremely vulnerable. You clearly disagree. Because you're not somebody looking to take 3 to 5 shots.
No, I'm not, and I would love to make a strong case for somebody else, and this is not a very typical Sarah pick, but I think that you're waiting for someone else to take that step forward, and you're waiting for her to return to some of her bigger races, and even if you look at the numbers of her last couple of races, there isn't someone in this field that's so much better than her.
No, but she's 3 to 5 on the morning line. I'm not saying, but they're not worse than her. They're not, listen.
They're not worse, and she's already been able to put randomized away. She's going to be the outside speed.
Put her away by a half length.
She's going to be the outside speed in this race. She isn't in as big of a field as she was in the Breeders' Cup Distaff, and now that she's getting back second off the layoff, maybe she can return to some of those races that she has run that are higher in numbers, and if she does, she's just faster than what anyone else has shown us before.
We disagree. And you say, I don't care about the field size. I mean, Randomized is running against a shorter field, too. Sure. And, you know, to be fair, now listen, we'll look at the Soul of an Angel race with Randomized last time, and obviously Randomized has got to show us that she can be as good as a 4-year-old as she was when she got good as a 3-year-old. And Soul of an Angel, I mean...
Where did this come from?
You missed the... Well, first time Safi Joseph, where it came from. It's not as though she didn't run some decent race in the past.
Sure.
The problem with her is... She's going to really have to run back to this 98 buyer to win the race, and it's the only one she ever ran, and you missed the opportunity at 25 to 1 last time. With IRAD, you're not getting close to that. Having said that, she ran.
She did. She ran very well, and I mean, that number isn't exactly one that completely came out of nowhere. She'd been run some faster races in the past, most of them not quite in the 90s overall when you look at her totality of her career. But it's not as though she'd never run a fast race overall. She was some sort of low 70s horse, and then suddenly we see this 98. At the same time, does she really want to go 1.1 miles? Is that her preferred distance, stretching back out from that mile like last time? I think that actually suits Randomized a little bit more.
I do too. I don't love her in here, but I mean, her last race was fast. I'm just not going to ignore that it was fast. That's all I'm going to say.
Which is fair.
As far as Raging Sea, I like Raging Sea today. And you talk about horses moving forward. She took a big step forward in her first start as a 4-year-old. I mean, she basically was a winner every step of the way in here. And this is a horse that at times has looked good, and at times she's been a bit disappointing, even though she won the Cumley. It wasn't a great effort. But you look at that race, right? The second place finisher, Scylla. ran an 87. She came back with 293 buyers, one of the stake last weekend. The fourth place finisher ran 92.91 and then 85 in here. The fifth place finisher came back and improved her buyer figure 3 points in her next start. So she's coming out of a race that is proving to be a pretty strong race, relatively speaking. And the other thing about her is, I mean, isn't she going to be sitting a pretty good trip in this race?
You would have to think so, towards the outside, drawing outside of both horses that we think are going to be forwardly placed. And it's not as though she's going to be so far back either. Right. I think that we aren't as high on Pretty Mischievous, but she's at least worth mentioning.
I agree.
She was awful last time.
We'll look at her race in the Acorn.
But
she was hideous.
But her races last year.
Well, that's the question to ask, Sarah. How sure are you that her races last year, I mean, obviously with improvement, but this Acorn was the one big fig she ran. Otherwise, she was running low 90s. Randomized was running considerably better figures. Now, it was later in the year, to be fair, you know, with Randomized, but I'm just not sure she's necessarily good enough. I mean, she ran really well to win the Oaks. She ran well in here, but she's going to have to show me. And I talked to Dan Pride from Godolphin after this race. Not this race, the race at Churchill. And he said, listen, you know, it was a sloppy track. We're going to have to give her another shot in the FIPS to figure out where she is. And they have to run in this race.
Yeah, they have to find out where she fits from a class standpoint.
I'm just wondering if even on her good races, she's good enough. She's going to have to take bigger step forward than a lot of horses. We already saw Raging Sea take the step forward. Can she?
And she's not going to be as forward as those other horses that have already taken that step forward as well. It's not like she's going to be so far out
Well,
of it,
I think she's probably a little faster than Raging Sea is. I guess it depends how quickly they're going. But, you know, listen, interesting race. I'm guessing the pace won't be as fast as the Acorn yesterday, and I think we should mention that was a tour de force.
Sensational blowout. I mean, looking at that, you think maybe she could have been in the Belmont.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm glad she's not. I don't understand this need to run these horses, and we need to move along. We'll take a break, but look where Just FYI finished if you want to get a gauge for just how well she ran. We'll be back with the second half of the card.
For almost 150 years, the Saratoga name has been synonymous with the finest quality, sustainably sourced spring water available anywhere. Saratoga carries on the rich tradition of its forefathers by crafting each stunning blue glass bottle with the same attention to detail and care that has been its hallmark for generations. Visit SaratogaSpringwater.com today or ask for us by name at your local market or restaurant. Saratoga Spring Water. Make every day exquisite.
We're back. She's Sarah. I'm Andy. The Woody Stevens presented by Mohegan Sun. It came up a barn burner. And I'm going to start with, excuse me, your top pick, my second pick in Bookham Dano with his effort in the Saudi Derby. And it certainly moved up when we saw what Forever Young could do in the Kentucky Derby. I'm not sure it's not a little apples and oranges. This is such a cool horse, though.
He's been so impressive, this New Jersey bred, and we've been able to see him frequently in New York and be treated to some of those big performances of his. And I wondered a little bit, and I think you did as well, going over, was he really going to stack up in this race? What was with the decision to head on over and try the Saudi Derby? But he proved himself in here. He barely got run down by Forever Young, and of course, we've seen Forever Young come back in the Kentucky Derby and finish a blanket photo third with the other top two finishers in Mystic Dan and Sierra Leone. So that legitimized that effort, I think, even more so. And I like that they're keeping him at these shorter distances. They maybe had a little bit of taste of Derby fever for 2 seconds, and then they decided to be
They never really did.
a little bit more realistic
They
with
never
it.
really did. They were always looking at these races. And the Saudi Cup's a huge purse on a one-turn mile, and they wanted to take a shot. And you can't blame them. What did they miss? Running in the Bay Shore of the Swale?
Nothing.
So I think it's great. I'm glad to see him back, and I agree with you. He's a major player. Prince of Monaco. I was looking, and we'll take a look. I mean, this horse ran a 103 buyer. Good trip or not. he ran a 103 buyer as a 2-year-old. And I looking up stats for Bob Baffert. 150 to 270 days, 5 to 9 months. He's been off 7 months on dirt sprints. Bob Baffert's 18 for 47, 38%, 34 of them hitting the board with a 267 ROI. In graded stakes, he's 3 for 7 with a 450 plus ROI, and 5 of the 7 hit the board. When Bob comes back in these spots, and I don't think he had a little extra room on the plane to shove him on there with National Treasure. This horse ran a race that's good enough to win this as a 2-year-old. I'm going to think he's ready, shipping over here, and I've got him on top. I don't love him, and I wouldn't take under 3 to 1 on him. I originally liked Vajos in this race, but I like Prince of Monaco.
And I think that race that we just took a look at, that Baspel, that wins this race, but what happened after that? That's where I have a little bit of a concern. He did regress quite a bit. Miramati, love Frank Miramati.
I don't really like him. He's really kind of a jerk.
Well, he's okay. But the horse, not quite that fast in relative terms to Muth, who we did see step.
But if he's running an 87, even his next start in his off race.
But an 87 doesn't win this race.
But it's a 2-year-old number.
So you're thinking that he's going to show that progressive improvement from 2 to 3. But
most
regressed.
From that, I understand. But, and, you know, I think it's reasonable. He's running numbers that aren't that slow. I mean, look at Nash, okay? Nash is 6 to 1 on the line. We'll show him in Vlahos. Obviously, Vlahos came out of this race, but Nash is going to take money in this race. He's not even running figures now that make him particularly competitive in this race.
And Nash is one of those horses that I think a lot of people got extremely overexcited about when he first debuted and then ran in his second race,
particularly
97 buyer. People had some high hopes and expectations for him, and I was never really on board. I liked him a little bit more when Vlahos was in this race, but I think that now drawing towards the outside of the other speed in this race, going the 7 furlong distance after showing that he at least is still keeping some sort of consistent form, sort of getting back to maybe some of those hopes that people had of him in terms of the company that he was keeping, as well as the race that he ran last time. We obviously saw what Seize the Gray came back to do in the Preakness. I kind of wonder if he's not quite as good as everyone thought, but he might sit a nice trip in this race.
He might. I'm not a biggest fan of him. I'm going against him. You've got him second. Let's take a look at Valentine Candy beating Frost Free. Valentine Candy's a horse that showed it in that maiden race here last year, and he keeps getting better. Will he be as good at 7 furlongs? It's not supposed to be a problem for him. I think he's a player. I love Frost Free. I think he's a really cool horse. I think, you know, I'm rooting for Brett Crichton to do well with him, but he's got to get an extra furlong. But I'll tell you something, the scratch of Lejos helps him more than any other horse in this race. And I know we'll see how much speed we get from Barksdale, and Barksdale has improved, but he's got to run without Lasix. He could be the speed of the speed in this race, and I think that'll give him at least a better chance.
And with that scratch, just as you mentioned, he does move up considerably in my mind in terms of his ability to possibly wire this field. And I wonder a little bit about the 7 furlongs for him, but at least he does have that one race at a mile where he finished 3rd, and it wasn't one of his faster numbers. He did run much faster in his next 2 starts in the Bachelor, as well as winning that Chickling at Pimlico. But at least he's tried to go a little bit further and still been around.
Those are 2-turn miles. I wouldn't want to compare it. I agree with you. And I think it's just tougher competition. But he's running good figs, and he's pretty good. Let's take a look at Reason Analysis and Maximus Meridius. And we'll talk quickly about Imagination as well. And we can also mention on the outside BU is probably better sprinting. I know Maximus Meridius ran really well in here. The scratch of Leos helps Reason Analysis because it takes out a good horse, but it does lessen the pace. But I still think they got to be moving enough in here. And I know Reason Analysis has to improve, but I'm not sure he's not the right closer. If you feel like this race could fall apart, is there a closer you really want more than him?
No, because I don't think we trust Nutella Fella.
Well, he's just not good enough to win.
No, absolutely not.
Ambitious spot.
Yes, and I think that with Maximus Meridius, the only sort of question mark I have about him is Doncho came back and was not very impressive at Churchill Downs in his next start a couple days ago, and that worries me a little bit in terms of the company that he was facing.
Didn't Doncho run, though, in New York? And
no, he ran at Churchill the other day.
Right, but didn't he run in the
won
race?
The Gold Fever
Right, won the
over
Gold
Maximus
Fever in his
Meridius,
next start.
And then he regressed to an 87 as the favorite, finishing 3rd.
Okay, but what did he get in the
96.
In the other race?
96.
Okay. Why are we talking about Don Show?
Because that's the horse that Maximus Meridius finished second to in his last start.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, I think he ran very well in there as a speed, but there's a lot of speed in here. BU might be better cutting back. I'm just not convinced on him, but he does have a big fig at 7 furlongs and Churchill 2 back.
He does, but I mean, taking that long to break your maiden, I don't love that with some of these Todd Pletcher horses. I know that there have been ambitious spots for this horse. He's been placed in graded stakes company. There were some high hopes for him, and he was showing up, but I kind of wonder overall just how good he is.
We got to start moving it along. I hear you.
We can go.
Imagination turns back in this race. I've never liked him as a horse.
I don't think he's that good.
Bob's numbers in general would turn back Bob Baffert. They're not very good, $1.40 plus ROI.
Nope.
Race number 9 is the War, known as the Jaipur. Now, I imagine Cogburn's connections would have liked it to rain because he does handle horses very well with some give. He's still pretty good. We'll take a look at the race at Churchill Downs. I think he's the horse to beat in this race, but I'll tell you something. I thought Mischief Magic ran very well in here closing, and I actually like his chances quite a bit in here as well. So I prefer him over Cogburn. I picked them second and third.
Which is completely fair, and Cogburn is one of those horses that once he switched to the turf, he's really taken that step forward, and that race last time out that we're taking a look at was an impressive effort coming off that little bit of a layoff. He's won over the soft turf, as you mentioned, but he has those numbers over a firmer surface as well. He is the horse to beat in this race. This is a competitive field. I just didn't want to take 2-1 on anybody.
Let's take a look at Arzak last time out, beating Mischief Magic. I think Arzak's pretty good, you know, and
I do
listen,
too.
beat the horse that I think is very dangerous on the outside. I don't really have a knock on this horse. He consistently runs fast figures.
He does. He shows up. He's been capable of handling this 5.5 furlong sprint distance in the past. He's had a steady diet of graded stakes over the course of his career. And I think you could argue maybe that his last 4 races have actually been some of his best. I mean, running against a horse in the Breeders' Cup Sprint and No Balls. He won the start prior to that in the Woodford. He ran very well last time. Mischief Magic seems to be one of those horses that is just running out of real estate a little bit too late, and I want him to get started a little bit sooner with his closing kick.
Let's take a look at Star of Mystery, and for people that haven't noticed it, this is a 3-year-old filly running against mostly older males, and this is her race in Dubai last time out, and her form a little better in Dubai than it was before. Maybe she was improving. I got to tell you, David's got her 6-1 morning line, and I imagine he is. Why would you want her at 6-1 and not No Name Mets at 30-1, the 3-year-old colt? I would take No Name Mets. I don't have any guarantee this horse is that good. She seems okay to me, but I feel like she's going to be a dramatic underlay, Sarah.
Right, and we've seen her take on males before, but is she really that capable? Is she really that good? I think that remains to be seen overall, and she's going to take money just based on connections and how ambitious they're being with this spot. I don't really have a good gauge of quite how talented she is.
They wanted to run the Intercontinental against the fillies and mares, but that's for 4-year-olds and up, so she couldn't get in. She did lose to a nice horse from Hong Kong. There were some okay horses. Casa Crete finished back, but he didn't run his race in there. Let's talk about your top choice. Well, we'll show the Dancing Buck Allegan race and talk about what you like about Allegan from one of my favorite trainers, Ned Howard.
I mean, he is one of those horses that has those lower profile connections, so he's not going to get the same respect on the tote board as some others might with the resume that he's been able to put together. I mean, he ran very well at Colonial in the DeHaas, finishing second to No Balls, who we would go see win the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. He ran okay in that Turf Sprint Championship. And then, I mean, last time out, maybe a little bit disappointing, and I can't really even say disappointing, finishing third behind Dancing Buck and American Monarch, and it was his first start off the layoff as well, so I know that he's proficient at handling this distance. He's kept good company overall throughout his career.
Lost by a head by No Balls. No, I don't think he's impossible.
And I know he's going to be a price.
No, I listen, this race is a war. I'm going to try to wake up the old-timer Big Invasion, and I'm wondering if, you know, getting a firmer turf is going to really help him. There is a question mark as to whether he can really run anymore, but I'm going to find out a much better price today than he's been in a lot of his races, and I know his good races can win it. He ran great when second in this race last year. He obviously ran a terrific race in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Last chance for him at a price in what's a very, 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 very competitive Grade 1 Jaipur presented by Resolute Racing, race number 10. A lot of press for Resolute Racing. We'll start with, this is the Hillendale Met Mile. We'll start with last year, a horse who could have been Horse of the Year, and certainly had a Horse of the Year type year the second half of the season, and ran well in the Met last year. will we see the good White Abarrio in here? And if we do, is he just too good for these, Sarah?
It's a fair question to ask, and I think that the common theme to many of the horses that are going to be shorter prices in this race or that you might think are contenders is, what have you done for me lately? And with some of them, it hasn't been quite as much as we've seen from them in the past. This was obviously a dominant performance when he was able to win this Breeders' Cup Classic. It wasn't quite that 110 buyer that we saw from him in the Whitney, where he's able to defeat Zandon and Cody's Wish, but it was more than good enough.
There also may be an argument he's a little better going a little shorter, which he's going to get in here. He's not going to be particularly pace compromised, but the horse you and I have on top in here, National Treasure, and we'll show him winning the Pegasus, he's going to have forward position on him, sitting behind in all likelihood, Hoist the Gold. And I'm going to tell you something. He's just a completely different horse. His dirt mile was terrific. I think he ran great in the Pegasus, chasing a very, very quick pace, and we saw how good Senior Buscador is. And his Saudi Cup, now, White Abarrio didn't show up in the Saudi Cup. That's one thing. His Saudi Cup was tremendous. He was chasing that fast pace that Saudi Crown was setting, and he finished in the wire with him. He ran extremely well there, and I just kind of prefer him as a more forwardly placed horse, but I'm not against White Abarrio. I'm just going to go to National Treasure.
I am as well, and I think that just having a little bit more forward position in all likelihood, and at least he ran some in Saudi. White Abarrio, maybe you don't want to hold it against him too much, but he was pretty disappointing. Maybe you draw a line through it. Maybe you think he comes back to some of his better races.
I don't think that he liked being inside behind horses, and it's one of the reasons I didn't like him, for better or worse. Blazing Sevens, and I'm speeding it up because we'll run out of time.
Get going.
Blazing Sevens came with his comeback win. See how full screen runs earlier today. I think he is a much better one-turn mile horse. I just don't know if he's good enough to be competitive here.
And if you want to take him today to try to find out at a little bit of a price, I completely get it. He's just never really run particularly fast enough overall that suggests that he's going to be competitive with some of the top contenders in this race. Now, he is that newly turned 4-year-old. This was a good comeback effort from him, but it's not as though he took a big step forward in terms of his numbers. Could he? Absolutely. Is this the spot to find out? I don't think so.
Yeah, listen, I mean, you had to run him in here. He's going to be under 10 to 1 in the Met Mile. I mean, it is a big race, and it's the right. He's a miler. He ran really well in the Champagne, so I think it's the right spot. I just don't know if he's good enough. You just love Hoist the Gold, so you had to put him at least somewhere. What I love about Sarah is I mocked her continuously for picking him in races he couldn't win, and then she didn't pick him in the Cigar Mile. But he did take advantage of his severe bias in here.
Exactly.
And in some ways, they've been a little overly ambitious. And what was his excuse last time, Sarah?
Well, I mean, I think that it was a hot pace, and he was cutting back a little bit, and they have really stepped up his campaign since this race, because I think that they saw, okay, maybe he can go a little bit further without really understanding
on a big bias racetrack.
Function of the bias racetrack and the aggressive ride by John Velasquez, and a horse that never really used to be on the lead before in the past, but those are the tactics that they've been going with going forwards. I don't know if he's going to bounce back. I liked him in the past when he would be prices and he would show up. He's at least going to be a price in here.
Let's talk about post time. We'll show his win in the Carter. I don't think post time is quite good enough, but I'm not sure. And the question is, how much pace will he get? But the thing I love about post time is, you look at his last race, which I actually think was better than the Carter, he can close into slow paces. And there are not a lot of high-level dirt sprinter types that can close into slow paces like he does. He's got some quality. He may not get the right setup against a very tough group.
Right, but I think that argument that he hasn't really gotten the right setup on several occasions and still manages to show up is a decent one to make. And you saw there Super Chow, a horse that would get out in the stretch. He still was able to outclose him towards the outside and go that wider distance.
He's a good horse.
He's decent.
Just, is he good enough to win here, and will he enough pace? I wouldn't bet him at 7 to 2.
No.
I'd bet him at 8 to 1, though. We'll see what price he ends up. The Resorts World Casino Manhattan is race number 11, and we'll start with program trading. And I don't think there's any real doubt that of the U.S.-based horses, he is the best horse in this race, and he has the speed to put himself in position. So while strong quality should be in front, I think he'll be sitting second. And listen, I love this horse, and I hope he wins this race. But I'm not going to take him if he ends up being a short price, though I think he's the horse to beat, as you do.
He's been very impressive. I mean, really only finishing second once in his entire career, and that was to Integration in his big performance over at Colonial. He's really done absolutely nothing wrong, and I will say that maybe you don't want to take him at 5-2 or a short price. This will be a better price than he has been on some occasions.
Not last time.
Not last time, but given the competition that he's facing in here, he's been a shorter price than he will be today on a couple of occasions. And like you said, I think that he's going to be able to establish some sort of forward position, get himself involved and into the game, and I think that that will help him and give him a little bit of an edge over some of the other horses that are the other shorter prices.
The question is the shippers, the Euros. And I want to start with Measured Time. Is Measured Time as good or better than Naval Power, who we beat last time? I think he might be a little better. Now, I don't trust horses where their best races come in Dubai. But I'll say one thing about this race in the Dubai Turf. He was the lone horse that was near the pace that survived. So he ran extremely well in the dynamics of this race. I don't think it was that strong a running of the Dubai Turf, but I think it fits with these horses. And I think you have to ask yourself is what price are you willing to take on him? Is he a Godolphin horse that'll be way over bet? If not, he's obviously a player here. And I think his last race a little better it looks, but can he bring that form out of Dubai?
And I think when you first take a look at that race where he was saving all of that ground and thinking that he got to really sit a nice trip on the inside, he was close to that pace. So I think those two things really cancel each other out in terms of being advantages that could have helped him. He's now on the far outside. I don't really know how good he is relative to the company that he was keeping in his last race, but overall, he had a very solid effort in there. And I think that when you're looking at the other Charlie Appleby horse, Nation's Pride, who maybe some want to make an excuse for in his last race as he...
There is an excuse for him. The excuse is because of the post, Frankie Dettori was more aggressive than suited the horse, and he ended up chasing the pace. It is a pace that pretty much held together. Maybe he's better shorter. I've never liked this horse, Sarah.
Me either.
And you obviously don't either.
No.
But that's the case to be made for him, and there's too many smart people that are making that point. For me to completely dismiss it, I'm just not a particular fan. I like Al Rifa in here, and we'll take a look in the Prix Gannet. Now, what I don't like about the Prix Gannet is that he was a closer that was outclosed for third.
Yes.
And he was a blanket finish, and he hung a little at the end. But he's
He
also
definitely
making
hung.
his first start in 8 months.
Sure.
Now, this was more of a grade Group 2 to Group 3 field than maybe not a true Group 1 type field in a Group 1, but Group 2 and Group 3 horses in Europe can compete over here.
Sure, of course.
And his prior race in the whatever it was, he lost to Ace Impact, who went on to win the Arc. And he lost to
Kept
him
good
by a
company.
half length. He won a very prestigious race as a 2-year-old. This horse has had a lot of quality. I like that John Velasquez is riding him too, who rode State of Play when Joseph O'Brien won with him, Saratoga Derby, and then he went on and won the Cox Plate and the Prince of Wales as well. I think this horse might be pretty good, and he's my top pick.
Which I understand, and based on that last race, I just wanted to see a little bit more of a kick, but it's not as though he hasn't done that in the past. He's kept very good company, and he's run very solid races prior to that last effort in his career overall.
Let's take a look at I'm Very Busy quickly, because he's going to take some money, and he was the favorite last time. He was very good in this Munez. I'm wondering if the Munez was really that strong a race. I know he got unruly before the start of his last race, and maybe that is an excuse for him. But man, he stunk. Farbridge ran a lot better than he did.
He was bad, and if you don't think that it was about those antics going into the gate, about those antics pre-race, then I don't really know what the excuse was, because this was a solid effort. But honestly, the field in this race...
Does he class up?
I don't know,
That's
but
the
I did
question.
like his Pegasus, I will say. Warm Heart, yes, she got a good trip. She is a decent horse. Integration.
So did this horse.
Integration didn't quite show the same level of ability we had seen from him prior to that, but he ran pretty well in that start, as well as running second to Integration in that Hill Prince. I'm not totally sold on his overall ability.
Got it.
We'll have
We
to
got to
see.
move on to the Belmont. The Belmont Stakes presented by Naira Betts is, of course, the big one. And I guess we'll start by looking at the Derby. And why not? So, you know, we've talked about it ad infinitum. Mystic Dan saved all the ground, but he was close to the fast pace. Sierra Leone, frankly, saved all the ground before going wide in the second turn, but for a deep closer, he got one hell of a trip. And was he really better than Forever Young? How much better, if at all, did he run than Mystic Dan? I don't know. Do you think having the 5 weeks while Mystic Dan run the Preakness gives him an edge? I don't have definitive answers here, but the one thing I will say about Sierra Leone is he is consistent. He always shows up, and while he's not running huge figures, he consistently has been the fastest horse in here. I think he's the horse to beat, Sarah.
I agree.
Like you, I put him second because I don't think at 8 or 9 to 5, I necessarily think he's a value play.
And there has been so much talk and concern over his ability to be one of those horses that's coming from so far back and how that might hinder him in a variety of his races. Well, it hasn't really before. We've seen him still able to close into whatever pace is ahead of him. It was a fast run in the Kentucky Derby, and still be able to get himself out and able to make that closing run. It's the lugging in that perhaps, now that's been corrected, they've changed some equipment, they've changed riders. We'll find out. I don't necessarily know that just changing the bit is going to stop that from happening.
Let's move on and talk about the Preakness and Seize the Gray. I think the one thing I like about Mystic Dan's chances is he's a horse that's most comfortable when he can spend a lot of time on the rail. And with the fact that Resilience and Seize the Gray both have much more speed, he's going to get his coveted rail position, and we'll find out if he's good enough and he can come back and run here. I don't have any reason to believe he won't run well. Did Seize the Gray freak out in the wet track? And with Dornick in here, and Mind Frame, isn't he going to get a lot more pace pressure?
Right. I think the pace is definitely worth discussing in this race because they've realized with Dornock that they need to go with this horse. That was kind of the idea, the plan going into the Kentucky Derby. He didn't break. It didn't work out. His race was over early on in there, but he's a horse that clearly needs to have that forward position to be successful.
And if you liked him in the Derby, you should bet him back.
I
just don't like him.
Sure,
but
I don't think he's that good, but
what about Seize the Gray? I don't like him. I want to see it again, but discounting Wayne Lucas in big races can get expensive.
And his last 2 races have been vast improvements over what we've seen from him.
No doubt.
Prior to that, does he really want to go 1.25 miles? I don't know. Is he going to be able to sustain that early speed with some pace pressure? I don't know that either. So, and the My Racehorse effect, I'm curious to see how the wagering goes with him.
I'm going to make my quick case for Resilience, my top pick. I need an alternative to the favorite. And the 2 alternatives are Honor Marie, who I think if you liked him in the Derby, you should give him another chance. He had a lousy trip. I just don't love him with a similar style than Sierra Leone. I just don't think he's as good as that one. But Resilience ran well in the Derby, in my opinion, and a lot better than he did in the Wood. He was bit forward, and he was wide every step of the way. And he's the kind of horse that I'm committed to betting on in a race like this. And also, he's not going to be pace compromised. Now, I think the pace is going to get fair, but he's going to be sitting right behind them in here, and I have to bet him off his Derby trip. The question will ultimately be whether or not he's good enough. Let's talk Mind Frame. For my money, there is no better relatively short price to bet against, maybe this year, but certainly in this entire weekend. He is not winning with this effort.
No, he got a very soft time of it on the front end in this race. That is not happening with the kind of contenders that he has to his inside, with the speed that we're going to see present in this race. Seize the Gray, Dornick. He's just going to be the one sitting outside of them and not get that super easy lead. It's a lot of new things to ask of him. Someone the other day told me that they thought he was the wise guy horse, and he's kind of the fool's gold to me.
The person who thinks he was the wise guy horse is not a wise guy. I agree with you. And he's going to have to run a lot faster at 1.25 miles with a different kind of trip than he got last time. He drew outside the other speeds. I think he's a horrific second choice. If he were 10 to 1 in here and you wanted to bet him, I wouldn't, but I get it at this price. And let me say something. You're an idiot if you leave a horse in the barn that's the 7 to 2 second choice in the Belmont Stakes. So I'm not knocking him for running him. I just don't like him.
Right, exactly. We all want to see those generational talents that are just
You've got to take your shot in this
so much better, and maybe he is not at 7 to 2 for me.
Let's take a look at Honor Marie in the Louisiana Derby, where I think he actually ran every bit as well as Catching Freedom did, and making the first move from the back of the pack, and Catching Freedom's last move got him there. He had a ridiculous trip in the Derby. He still has to show he's good enough, but I can see the argument for him. I just, as I said, prefer a deep, if I'm going to take a deep closer, I'm not going to try to beat Sierra Leone with a horse with a similar running style.
And that's completely understandable. I think that he's one of those horses that hasn't really had as much of a clean opportunity to show us that he has improved significantly as a 3-year-old. Coming back in the Risen Star, first off the layoff, behind Sierra Leone, Track Phantom, Catching Freedom, sloppy sealed track. Then he has that good effort in Louisiana Derby, finishing second to Catching Freedom, his highest Buyer speed figure yet. No chance at all in that Kentucky Derby.
We are going to run out of time. If we don't move very fast, Eddie will skip the replays and race 12 and 13 and 14. We'll just go through our picks. But let's take a look at Antiquarian, the Wine Steward, and Protect the Peter Pan. I think if a horse is effective out of this race, it's going to be Antiquarian. And I always love the Centennial horses. I just have a thing for them. He's going to have to get faster. But he's lightly raced. He could improve. He could take a step forward. He's not that slow. Like
he had a trip in the Louisiana
He's going to
Derby.
be close enough at the pace, so he won't be compromised either way. I don't like the Wine Steward, or I don't think he'll get better with distance.
No.
And Protective is terrific, but I wonder with a maiden, you keep running a little over his head if at some point it catches up to him.
I'm not going to take a horse to win their first race in the Belmont Stakes. I'm just not. If he does, good for him, but it's not really what I want to do with my money. Antiquarian is an interesting horse. He's run okay in his last 2 starts. He had that big trip in the Louisiana Derby. He just needs to get faster.
Sarah's taken Honor Marie as her alternative, the horse to beat Sierra Leone. I went to Resilience. We'll see what happens in the Belmont Stakes presented by Naira Bets. Post time is around 6:41. You can catch all the action on Fox Sports. Also, we'll be covering on FS1. Race number 13. Very quickly, my picks. I've got the number 8 on top in this race. Lady Lauban, switching to Dave Duggan. I love Dave Duggan, and this horse I thought has run fast enough in the turf, had a wide trip last time out with no chance, and just was my pick in here. You've gone to the 5 Downtown Channel.
One of my more insane ideas of the day, a horse that did no running first time out, was pulled up on the dirt, but it's much more of a turf type of pedigree. Respect for Horacio de Paz, like Ortiz getting on this horse, and we just don't know what this one is or isn't capable of, and is going to be a big price.
He's a turf-type pedigree, but the dam was over 2 in the turf, and she was
good.
terrible, and she produced 3 horses that couldn't outrun you and I in a horse suit on the turf. North End Lady seemed like a logical horse in here as well. Race number 14, I like the 2 Salt Spray, who I just think is running faster turf sprints than anybody, and it's just the horse to beat in here. You've gone to Capture the Flag.
We'll see how this horse does cutting back in distance, and I don't necessarily love turf cutbacks, neither do you. But
Because they don't work.
As far as company that this horse has kept redistricting, I'm very busy. Even on the dirt behind Ever So Mischievous, this horse has been facing some solid horses overall. If this horse wants to be a sprinter on the turf, this is a good spot to find out relative to who this horse has been facing in the past.
Todd Pletcher, 5 for 48, 10%, 76-cent ROI with turnbacks on the turf. My long shot I will absolutely be using is the 4 Famous Gent. I just don't know if he's good enough, but man, has he had some trips. And his trip last time is well worth you guys watching. Sarah, tremendous job. Thank you as always. That does it for the Talking Horses for Belmont Stakes Day. Let's head over to Naira Bets. If you're not a member, now is the time. Use the promo code Belmont25 and we will match the $200 your initial deposit. And it's the last day for this. We'll give you a free $25 bet for the Belmont Stakes. We're not going to let you bet that tomorrow, though I'd like to, and I might need to get out. Where else? We've got special wagers today, the Met Mile Belmont Stakes Double, as well as an all-turf triple play. Visit belmontstakes.com/special for other special wagers. We have a 50% bonus on your winning bet in the Belmont Stakes. You bet in Naira Bets, you opt in, 50% bonus. We have show slates. FS1 basically from 10:30 until 7:27. Different shows, different names. FS2 from 7 to 8:10. All the action will be covered. Head on over to Fox, though, from 4 to 7, 4 to 6, Belmont Day on Fox, 6 to 7, the Belmont Stakes on Fox. Get all the action there or join us on FS1. Sarah, thanks again. Frank Miramati, my main man, he's got to reprise the scratches and changes. Enjoy what is going to be an absolutely spectacular Belmont Stakes Day.
For almost 150 years, the Saratoga name has been synonymous with the finest quality, sustainably sourced spring water available anywhere. Saratoga carries on the rich tradition of its forefathers by crafting each stunning blue glass bottle with the same attention to detail and care that has been its hallmark for generations. Visit SaratogaSpringwater.com today or ask for us by name at your local market or restaurant. Saratoga Spring Water. Make every day exquisite.